The 2D Metroid games are impressive atmospheric adventures that have you exploring unknown alien environments, collecting a variety of awesome power-ups, and battling all sorts of different creatures and monsters. I've always heard so much about how fantastic the 2D Metroid games are, but for some reason I just never got around to playing them myself. These games are a pretty important part of the larger video game landscape. There's even an entire subgenre named after it in combination with Castlevania. I've played lots of incredible Metroidvanias over the years like Hollow Knight, SteamWorld Dig 2, and Ori and the Will of the Wisps, but never the actual Metroid games themselves. Before this year, the only experience I had with the Metroid series was Samus being in Super Smash Bros. And the Metroid Blast minigame in Nintendo Land. I still think Metroid Blast is great, but it's not exactly an authentic Metroid experience. That leads us to earlier this year, when I played through Super Metroid for the first time. This game absolutely blew me away. It was an amazing game that was unlike anything else I had played before. After that, I was eager to play more, but life got busy, so I put the other 2D Metroid games to the side for the time being. Then a magical little thing happened in early June at Nintendo's E3 2021 Direct. The first brand new 2D Metroid game in 19 years was announced, titled Metroid Dread. Even with my very limited knowledge about the series, I was still extremely excited and knew that this was a really big deal. And soon after that announcement, I booted up my Wii U, downloaded both Metroid Zero Mission and Metroid Fusion, and ordered a copy of Metroid Samus Returns off of eBay. After playing through those 3 games as well as replaying Super Metroid again, it's time to review the first 4 2D Metroid games. Keep in mind that this isn't every single 2D Metroid game. Zero Mission is a 2004 remake of the 1986 NES original that started it all. Samus Returns is the official remake of Metroid 2 Return of Samus that released back in 1991 on the Game Boy. There's also a popular fan remake of Metroid 2 called AM2R, but I decided to play the official Nintendo remake since the team behind Samus Returns, Mercury Steam, are the ones making Metroid Dread. Then there's Metroid 3, Super Metroid, and Metroid 4, Metroid Fusion. Neither of these games need remakes since they still hold up to this day. It's kind of complicated, I know, but those are the 4 2D Metroid games I will be reviewing in this video. And I'll try to keep this as spoiler-free as possible, so I'll just be using footage from the first couple hours of each game. Now let's get started with Metroid Zero Mission. Metroid Zero Mission is a remake of the first Metroid on NES, but it's really more of a reimagining. The original Metroid hasn't exactly aged gracefully, with extremely limited movement options, repeating rooms that look exactly the same, and no map system of any kind. So Zero Mission changes up a lot of the game to modernize it and make it a lot more accessible. Movement is improved, so now you can crouch and shoot at the same time, you can grab ledges, and jumping feels way less floaty. There's obviously improved visuals, and there's actually a map screen this time, which is super helpful. Another change is that this game is more linear, which is either a good or bad thing depending on who you ask. For me, it's a big improvement. I'm all for exploration, but I also like having a clear direction so I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I know there are some people who prefer their Metroid games to be completely open with as little directions as possible, but I think Zero Mission strikes a good balance. You know where you're supposed to be going, but you don't know how to get there, so you still have to do a lot of exploring. It may have lost some of the feelings of complete isolation the original had, but I think Zero Mission improves so much that it's worth it. Plus, the whole game still has the amazing atmosphere you'd expect from a 2D Metroid game, just not as extreme as it was back in 1986. Now let's move on from comparing these 2 games and talk about Zero Mission itself. First off, the pixel art graphics look incredible, especially for being on an underpowered system like the Game Boy Advance. Environments look unique and interesting, and they're full of nasty looking monsters and enemies trying to kill you. Samus feels great to control, her blaster shots are quick and precise, and being able to aim diagonally is a lifesaver. In general, the gameplay is fantastic. You can get into a flow of combat, platforming, and checking for secrets that makes playing through this game a smooth and engaging experience. All the upgrades are spaced perfectly, so you're consistently earning new power-ups that really make you feel more powerful. Boss fights are another highlight. These intense encounters are tough but fair. Even when I died, it didn't feel cheap or frustrating since I knew exactly what I did wrong and how to improve next time. I won't spoil the later boss fights here, so just know that they're super epic and impressive battles. There's also a gameplay segment near the very end of the game that is really awesome. It totally caught me by surprise and is now probably one of my favorite moments in any Nintendo game. And of course there's the fantastic music. Most of the songs use the same melodies as the original, but there's also lots of new music and all of it is great. Metroid music is so good at building a great sense of atmosphere that makes exploring so much better. And the soundtrack can get super energetic during the intense moments of the game. The story is also handled really well, with just enough to keep you engaged, but it never gets in the way of the gameplay. Overall, Metroid Zero Mission is an absolutely incredible game, and it's the perfect way to kick off the 2D Metroid series. If you've never played one of these games before, this is the place to start. Metroid Samus Returns is another remake, but this one released more recently in 2017. Because it's a much newer game, it has a ton of improvements that bring 2D Metroid into the modern age of gaming. The basic setup for Samus Returns is that you have to hunt down all the remaining Metroids on planet SR388, and once you defeat a certain amount, the world will open up, allowing you to explore further. The game doesn't tell you where to find the Metroids, so you'll have to find them all by yourself. But you do make your way through the world in a linear fashion from area to area, so it's less of a big connected world than something like Super Metroid. But each area is huge and has enough secrets to find that you still get a great sense of exploration. And luckily there's a teleportation system, so you never have to backtrack too far, which makes the linear map much less frustrating. For the first time in a 2D Metroid game, Samus Returns has 3D character models and environments. As much as I love the pixel art of the other games, I think this fresh coat of paint is the perfect way to evolve the series and continue it into the future without making the games feel dated. Some of the environments in the background are just stunning, and give the world a sense of scale that makes exploring this planet so much better. The sound design is really great too. Firing Samus's arm cannon feels snappy and impactful. Enemies make all sorts of weird sounds, and there's something so satisfying about opening doors in this game. You also have all the usual awesome power-ups you'd expect, as well as some really cool unique upgrades like the Spider Ball. Samus Returns still feels like a classic 2D Metroid game, but it also improves upon the formula in so many different ways. You now have full 360-degree aiming, which makes a huge difference. Now combat is way more precise. Some of my favorite new changes are really small things, like fire areas having blazing hot air come out of the doors before you enter, a new scan feature that reveals what blocks can be destroyed, and the new sound for collecting smaller upgrades like missiles and energy tanks. This new upgrade tune doesn't sound as epic as the classic one, but now the classic upgrade tune can be saved for the really important power-ups, making them feel more special. These small changes may sound minor and insignificant, but it all adds up to make the game so much more enjoyable. Probably the biggest change to the classic 2D Metroid gameplay is the addition of a new melee counter that lets you counter enemies right before they attack and then quickly shoot them, dealing more damage. This changes the flow of gameplay a lot from previous games, and luckily I think it's a really good change for the most part. Enemy encounters become a lot more interesting now that timing is involved, although using the melee counter does stop your movement completely, which can feel a little awkward. In the first couple hours, combat can feel like you're just standing and waiting for the enemy to attack you over and over again. But once you get more power-ups and get later into the game, the combat becomes a lot more free-flowing and gives you more options to work with. Speaking of the melee counter, this new move makes boss fights a lot more cinematic and engaging. Successfully countering a boss will start these super awesome combat sequences that allow you to deal a ton of damage and look cool while doing it. This game can get pretty challenging, but it still feels fair and manageable. There are a few boss fights towards the end that took me a lot of tries to finally defeat, but I'm totally okay with difficulty as long as it doesn't get too frustrating, and this game finds a good balance. Samus Returns is a really great game, and it was probably the most fun to play through out of these 4 games for me since the gameplay has been improved so much. This game finally makes Metroid feel like it's keeping up with all the competition, rather than being left behind in the past. Super Metroid is often considered one of the greatest games of all time, and for good reason. As impressive as the first 2 Metroid games were, Super Metroid totally changed the game when it comes to 2D action-adventure open-world games. The classic 2D Metroid gameplay has been refined to near perfection in this game, with a huge interconnected open world to explore, clever and engaging puzzles scattered around the map, improved combat now that you can aim diagonally, and an upgrade system that creates an amazing sense of pacing and progression. This game really nails the feeling of isolation and atmosphere while exploring this strange and unknown alien planet. There's hardly any story or instructions in this game. You have to discover pretty much everything all by yourself. That might sound intimidating, but the level design always gives you just enough clues to piece everything together. Although there were a few times where the solution to an environmental puzzle felt a little too abstract. But for the most part, you can figure out where you need to go if you pay close attention to the world around you. This game really encourages experimentation. It gives you all the tools you need and then goes completely hands-off and lets you take it from there. It can be confusing at times when trying to figure out where to go or how to get past a certain obstacle, but it's more than worth it when you finally find the solution. When the answer clicks in your head and everything works out, it feels like you really earned that victory since the game didn't get in your way at all. This was the first 2D Metroid game with a map, and it's incredibly helpful and makes traversing the world a lot more fun and less frustrating. Being able to open up the map screen and see where you are and where you've been is a luxury we often take for granted in games these days, so it's important to remember just how groundbreaking this was for Metroid at the time. The visuals of Super Metroid still look great today thanks to beautiful pixel graphics and strong art direction. The way Samus moves looks much more natural and realistic compared to her previous games. The soundtrack is terrific, with amazing ambient songs that flesh out the world and improve the gameplay even more. There's really no way I could describe the music of Super Metroid accurately using words, so I'll just let the soundtrack speak for itself. Another one of my favorite parts of this game is the way it tells its story. Aside from the opening of the game, there's hardly any dialogue at all. The narrative is shown to the player through gameplay rather than proper cutscenes, and that's what makes it feel so special. Samus never chimes in and gives her thoughts on anything that's happening. You get to come to your own conclusions about what's happening in the story. And without spoiling anything, the climax of the story is incredible, and is easily one of the most memorable finales of any video game. But as much as I love this game, it still isn't perfect. Compared to the other games in this video, Super Metroid's gameplay can feel floaty and inaccurate at times. You do get used to it the more you play, and it's definitely a huge improvement on what came before, but there's no denying that the 2D Metroid series has moved on and continued to refine their gameplay, causing Super Metroid to feel a little dated in some ways. But in other ways, this game still outshines the newer games, mainly in the open world exploration and the environmental storytelling. This game was revolutionary, and the fact that it still holds up as well as it does is a testament to how well crafted this experience is. Metroid Fusion is the last new original 2D Metroid game, well, until later this year. This game seems to be one of the more divisive Metroid games, but nowhere near as controversial as something like Other M. Fusion changes up the 2D Metroid formula in a lot of different ways. Instead of exploring an alien planet, you're exploring a space station that has many different environments inside it. The game is also much more linear, with a heavier emphasis on storytelling and characters. Fusion is also a lot more scary and more difficult than any Metroid game before it. So do all these new changes work, or should the game have gone with a more typical Metroid experience? Well, I can't speak for everyone, but for me, it absolutely works and it creates a fantastic new 2D Metroid game. It still isn't perfect, but Metroid Fusion is a more than worthy addition to the series. Because of its more linear design, the story can really thrive and explore an amazing narrative that fits the Metroid games so well. After being attacked by a mysterious parasite, Samus is severely weakened. But thanks to a Metroid vaccine, she survives and is now the only one capable of fighting the X-Parasite threat. So she's sent to a massive space research station where the parasite has taken over and killed all the crew on board. Now it's your job to work your way through the station and try to stop the X-Parasite from taking over the entire galaxy. And if that wasn't scary enough, there's also a terrifying evil parasite version of Samus, known as the SAX, hunting you constantly. The previous Metroid games have always had some elements of horror in them, but nothing like this. The encounters with the SAX are scary and suspenseful, since this corrupted version of Samus can kill you in just a few seconds. In general, Samus is much weaker in this game. Basic enemies deal way more damage than you think they would, and it's harder to gain back your health. I absolutely love all of this. It turns the isolation and fear elements of Metroid up to 11, and I was engaged and on edge during the entire game. As much as I love Super Metroid's approach to story, Fusion shows that a Metroid game can create some really epic and memorable moments when the narrative takes more of a front seat. Although I do think the game can get a little too difficult at times. Some of the boss fights got pretty frustrating. The higher difficulty matches the tone of the game, but it wasn't the usual perfect balance of difficulty I was used to. The story and scary atmosphere are easily the best parts about this game, but I don't think the general gameplay is quite as good as the other 2D Metroid games. You are always assigned a clear objective in a navigation room, and the map is often revealed before you even have the chance to explore it for yourself. There are some hidden rooms and pathways, but for the most part you follow a linear path. Just because the game is linear doesn't inherently make it bad, but it's definitely not as open and exploration-based as Metroid games usually are, which makes the gameplay a little less fun for me personally. But I think it's totally fine to change it up every once in a while, and I think this game's linearity works perfectly for the story it's trying to tell. At the end of the day, Metroid Fusion is an awesome, scary, and well-designed adventure that I loved playing through. All of its unique elements are exactly what makes it so great. And those were all my thoughts on the first 4 2D Metroid games. I'm so glad I finally played through these games. They really are amazing, and now I can honestly say that Metroid is one of my favorite Nintendo franchises. What impresses me so much about these games is that they never get too comfortable with their formula. Each of these 4 games have unique aspects and interesting ideas in them, and I think that's the sign of a truly great series. I was already excited for Metroid Dread, but after playing through these games my excitement levels have gone through the roof. Hopefully Metroid Dread will have the perfect pacing of Zero Mission, the visuals and gameplay improvements of Samus Returns, the incredible exploration and upgrade system of Super Metroid, and the terrifying storytelling of Fusion. And from what I can tell so far, it seems to have all of that plus even more. I hope you enjoyed this look back at the 2D Metroid games. I know I enjoyed playing them and making this video. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see ya in the next one.